Good evening, and welcome back to Mr. Chill Chapters. There are roads in this country that are more than just asphalt and paint. They are scars on the face of the land, lonely arteries that pulse with a forgotten rhythm. These are the deserted roads, the places where the hum of civilization fades into a profound and terrifying silence. This is the domain of the long-haul trucker, the solitary navigator of America's vast empty spaces. Out here, miles from the nearest town, the rules of the world you know begin to fray. The laws of physics seem optional, and the comforting logic of cause and effect dissolves into the shimmering heat haze on the horizon. This is a world where the silence is so deep it becomes a sound in itself. A world where the only other heartbeat for 100 miles is the one hammering in your own chest. The stories you are about to hear come from these places. They are not the tales told in brightly lit diners or busy truck stops. They are the secrets kept by drivers who have stared too long into the darkness and seen something stare back. They are accounts of roads that seem alive, of echoes that defy time, and of encounters so strange they challenge the very definition of reality. These are the chilling truths found only on the loneliest roads in the dead of night. So, settle in and listen closely. We are about to turn off the main highway and venture down a path where the only signs are warnings, and the only destination is fear. Story 1. The Road That Breathes. My name is Hector. For 15 years I've hauled mining equipment through the American Southwest. It's a brutal job, hauling oversized loads through some of the most desolate landscapes on the planet. I've seen the deserts of Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico in all their moods, from the soul-baking heat of a summer afternoon to the bone-chilling cold of a winter midnight. I thought I knew the desert. I thought I understood its harsh, simple language of rock, sand, and silence. I was wrong. There's a road out there, a stretch of state highway so forgotten it doesn't even have a number on most maps, that speaks a different language entirely. It's the language of something ancient, something alive, and something that is waking up. The job was a last-minute contract. A mining company needed a massive custom-built drill bit transported from a quarry near Flagstaff to a new site in the remote plains of eastern Arizona. The direct route, a well-maintained state highway, was closed due to a flash flood that had washed out a bridge. The only alternative was a 200-mile detour on an old decommissioned service road that cut straight through the heart of the painted desert. It was a road most drivers avoided. They said it was cursed, that it did strange things to your truck and your mind. But the company was paying a hefty bonus for the rush job, and I was never one for superstition. I turned onto the old road just as dusk was settling, painting the desert landscape in surreal shades of orange, purple, and blood red. The asphalt was cracked and ancient. The yellow line faded to a barely visible ghost. Within minutes, the last vestiges of civilization vanished behind me. There were no other cars, no power lines, no signs of human life. It was just me, my rig, and a silence so absolute it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. The first sign that something was wrong was the vibration. It wasn't the familiar rumble of my engine or the jostle of the uneven road. This was different. It was a low, deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to be coming up from the road itself. I could feel it through the soles of my boots, through the driver's seat, vibrating up my spine. It was a slow, steady thump, 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 like a colossal heartbeat deep beneath the earth. I pulled over, thinking I had a serious engine problem. I killed the engine. The cab fell silent, but the vibration continued, even stronger now without the engine's rumble to mask it. Thump, 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 thump. I got out of the truck and placed my hand on the asphalt. It was warm, unnaturally warm for a desert night, and the vibration was undeniable. The road felt alive, It felt like I was standing on the skin of some gargantuan sleeping beast. A wave of primal fear, sharp and cold, shot through me. I told myself it was seismic activity, a small, localized tremor. I got back in my truck, started the engine, and drove on, trying to ignore the slow, steady heartbeat of the road beneath me. As night deepened, the second phenomenon began. A strange, faint mist started to rise from the cracks in the asphalt. It wasn't fog. The air was crystal clear, the stars blazing in the black sky. This was a thick, oily, faintly luminous vapor seeping up from the ground itself. It clung to the road, creating a low-lying, glowing river of mist that my headlights struggled to penetrate, and it had a smell. A strange, organic, slightly sweet smell like damp, decaying vegetation and rich, fertile earth. It was the smell of a jungle, a swamp, a smell that had no business being in the middle of the arid Arizona desert. The mist grew thicker, and as it swirled around my cab, it began to play tricks on my eyes. The familiar shapes of the desert, the cacti, the rock formations, began to twist and warp in the glowing vapor. A tall saguaro cactus would, for a split second, look like a gaunt skeletal figure with its arms raised to the sky. A pile of boulders would momentarily resemble a crouching, predatory animal. I knew they were hallucinations, tricks of the light and my tired mind, but they were vivid, and they were terrifying. The heartbeat of the road grew stronger, the pulsing vibration syncing up with the pounding of my own heart. Thump, 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 thump. The glowing mist swirled and the whispers started. They weren't on the radio, they were inside my head. Faint, sibilant whispers like the rustling of a million dry leaves. They were speaking a language I didn't understand, but the emotional intent was clear. It was a call, an invitation, a promise of ancient knowledge and a release from the burdens of the flesh. The whispers told me to stop the truck, to get out, to lie down on the warm, breathing asphalt, and to let the road take me. To become one with the heartbeat. I was losing my mind. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my body drenched in a cold sweat. I focused on the one solid thing in my world, the faded yellow line on the road. I had to keep driving. I had to get off this road. But the road didn't want me to leave. The hallucinations became more intense. I saw figures standing in the mist by the side of the road, tall, thin, vaguely human shapes made of swirling sand and glowing vapor. They didn't move, they just stood there watching me, their heads cocked as if listening to the same whispers I was hearing in my skull. Then the road itself began to change. The cracks in the asphalt widened, and the strange organic vapor poured out in thick plumes. In the beam of my headlights, I could see something moving within the cracks, something dark and wet and glistening. It looked like a network of thick black veins or roots pulsing in time with the heartbeat, spreading across the road like a living web. The road was not just breathing, it was bleeding. I saw a shape ahead, a dark mass blocking the road. It was a truck, another rig pulled over to the side. Its hazard lights were on, but they were faint, pulsing weakly. As I got closer, I saw that the truck was old, rusted, and covered in the same strange, root-like tendrils that were coming from the road. The tendrils had enveloped the truck, crawling up its wheels, across its cab, and into the engine compartment. The driver's side door was open. Against every instinct, I slowed down. I had to see. I had to know. I pointed my spotlight at the open door of the cab. The driver was still inside, slumped over the steering wheel, but he wasn't a man anymore. The tendrils had covered him, merged with him. His skin was pale and translucent, and I could see the black vein-like roots spreading beneath its surface. His eyes were open, and they were glowing with the same faint, oily luminescence as the mist. He was part of the road now. He had accepted the invitation. A scream of pure animal terror tore from my throat. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, swerving around the consumed truck. The whispers in my head became a roar, a chorus of 1,000 voices begging me, commanding me to stop, to join them, to become one. The hallucinations intensified. The desert on either side of the road was no longer a desert. It was a writhing, living landscape of flesh-like plants and pulsing organic structures, all bathed in the sickly, sweet-smelling, glowing mist. I drove like a madman, my eyes fixed on the horizon, praying for the dawn, praying for the end of this road. I don't know how long I drove. It could have been hours. It could have been minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I drove through a final thick wall of the glowing mist and emerged into the normal, clean, cold air of the desert night. I looked in my rearview mirror. The road behind me was just a normal, cracked, empty stretch of asphalt. The mist was gone. The vibration was gone. The whispers were gone. The silence was just silence again. I drove until the sun came up, and I didn't stop until I reached the outskirts of a small, normal town. I pulled into a gas station, my body trembling so violently I could barely stand. I got out and walked around my rig. The tires were caked in a strange, dark, loamy soil that smelled faintly sweet. And on the front of my grill there was a single, thick black tendril like a severed root wrapped around the chrome. It was still faintly warm to the touch. I delivered the drill bit. I collected my bonus, and I never ever spoke of what happened on that road. I quit my job a month later. I couldn't face the desert anymore. I couldn't face the silence. I know that road is still out there, a living, breathing, and hungry entity sleeping under a thin skin of asphalt. It calls to the lonely, the tired, the desperate. It offers them a connection, a sense of belonging, a release from their solitude. But the price is everything. It doesn't just take your truck or your life. It takes your very self and makes you a part of its ancient, lonely heartbeat. There are places in this world, forgotten corners of the map, that are not meant for us. They are the domains of things much older than we are, and sometimes we are just trespassers, lucky to escape with our lives and a piece of a nightmare clinging to our grill. Story 2. The Echo in the Canyon. My name is Leo. I'm a flatbed driver, mostly hauling construction materials. Steel beams, concrete pipes, that sort of thing. My routes take me through some of the most beautiful and desolate parts of the American West. I've always loved the canyons of Utah. There's a humbling, cathedral-like silence to them. The sheer ancient walls of red rock seem to absorb sound, creating a sense of peace you can't find anywhere else. I used to think of that silence as peaceful. Now I know it's not empty, it's full of echoes, and some of those echoes haven't happened yet. The job was a standard run. A load of prefabricated bridge sections from Salt Lake City to a construction site in rural Colorado. The route took me through a stretch of U.S. Route 191 that carves its way through a series of deep, winding canyons. It's a lonely road, especially at night. The canyon walls are so high they block out the sky and radio signals can't penetrate. You're in a world of your own, a river of asphalt flowing through a canyon of stone. It was a clear, moonless night. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low rumble of my diesel engine. I had my satellite radio on, listening to a classic rock station. But as I drove deeper into the main canyon, the signal began to sputter and fade. This was normal. The canyon walls were notorious for blocking signals. The radio eventually fell silent, replaced by a soft, barely there static. I drove on, content with the quiet. After about 20 minutes of driving through the heart of the canyon, the radio crackled back to life. But it wasn't the rock station. It was a voice. My voice. "Yeah, coffee's getting cold, should have gotten a lid," the voice from the radio said. It was me, clear as day. I froze, my hand hovering over the radio dial. I had said those exact words to myself, muttered them under my breath maybe 10 minutes ago. It was a perfect, crystal-clear recording of my own voice. I tried to rationalize it. It had to be a freak signal bounce, a bizarre atmospheric reflection. Maybe my own CB transmission, if I had made one, was somehow being bounced back at me by the canyon walls. But I hadn't used my CB, and this wasn't a crackly CB signal. It was as clear as if I were speaking into a studio microphone. I shook my head, unnerved, and kept driving. The radio fell silent again. 5 minutes later, it crackled back on. "Damn deer," my voice said from the speaker, laced with the adrenaline of a near miss. Came out of nowhere, almost took off my fender. My blood ran cold. That had also happened. About 15 minutes prior, a large mule deer had darted out in front of my truck. I had swerved, my heart pounding, and muttered those exact words. The radio was playing back my immediate past. It was like a temporal echo. My own words and experiences bouncing off the canyon walls and reaching me minutes after they had happened. This was beyond any atmospheric trick I had ever heard of. I felt a deep, creeping dread. The canyon didn't just feel silent anymore. It felt watchful. It felt like it was recording me. I reached for the radio to turn it off, but my hand stopped. A morbid, terrifying curiosity held me in place. What else would I hear? I drove for another 10 minutes in tense silence. Then the radio spoke again. This time it wasn't just my voice, it was a conversation. "So what's the story with this load?" a voice asked. It was my dispatcher, Dave. "Just bridge sections for the new overpass near Grand Junction," my own voice replied. "Right. Weather looks clear for you all the way through. Should be a smooth run. Call me when you're clear of the canyon." "Will do, Dave. Talk to you in a bit." The conversation ended. I stared at the radio, my mind struggling to comprehend. That was the phone call I had made to my dispatcher before I entered the canyon over an hour ago. The echoes were not in chronological order. The canyon was playing back my past, but it was shuffling the deck. It was like listening to a recording of my life, cut up and reassembled at random. The feeling of being watched intensified. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. The canyon walls, which had once seemed majestic, now felt like the walls of a prison or a laboratory. Something here was observing me, studying me, replaying my existence for its own inscrutable purpose. I drove faster, a desperate need to escape the canyon's oppressive silence and its terrifying echoes growing with every mile. The road ahead began a steep, winding descent, a series of sharp switchbacks carved into the canyon wall. It was a dangerous stretch of road that required my full attention. As I navigated the first sharp turn, the radio crackled to life with a new sound. It was a sound that made every muscle in my body go rigid with fear. It was the sound of a massive, catastrophic tire blowout. A loud, explosive bang followed by the high-pitched squeal of tortured rubber and the terrifying, grinding screech of metal on asphalt. And over it all, I could hear a voice screaming. My voice. A scream of pure, final animal terror. The sound cut off, replaced by that dead, humming silence. I had just heard my own death. I slammed on the brakes, my rig groaning to a halt in the middle of the narrow two-lane road. I sat there, my body trembling uncontrollably, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That wasn't an echo from the past. I had never had a blowout like that. I had never screamed like that. The canyon wasn't just playing back my past, it was playing my future. It was a warning. A prophecy. The sound I had just heard was going to happen. It was going to happen here, on this treacherous stretch of road. My training. My instincts, everything told me to get out and check my tires, but I was paralyzed by fear. To get out of the truck now in this place felt like surrendering to my fate. It felt like stepping onto the stage to play my part in a tragedy that had already been written. The silence in the cab was deafening. I looked at the road ahead, the sharp, dark curves winding down into the blackness. The scream from the radio echoed in my mind. I had to move. Staying here felt just as dangerous as driving on. I took a deep, shaky breath and slowly, carefully put the truck in gear. I decided not to check the tires. The knowledge felt like a curse. If I found a weak tire, would I be able to fix it? Or would trying to fix it be the very thing that caused the accident? It was a paradox, a trap laid by time itself. I decided to drive, but I drove like a man carrying a bomb made of glass. I took my speed down to a crawl, barely 5 miles an hour. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. My eyes were glued to the road, scanning for any pothole, any rock, any tiny imperfection that could trigger the catastrophe I had already heard. Every groan of the truck, every shift of the cargo sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. The canyon walls seemed to press in, the darkness alive and hungry. The silence was no longer just a lack of sound, it was the sound of a clock ticking down to 0. As I rounded the next hairpin turn, my headlights illuminated something in the middle of the road. It was a large, dark shape, a rock slide, a pile of jagged red rocks completely blocking my lane. I stopped the truck, my heart hammering. This was it. This had to be connected. I looked at the rock slide, then at the narrow shoulder of the road. There was just enough room to get around it, but it would mean putting my passenger side wheels right on the edge of a sheer 1,000-foot drop. It was an incredibly risky maneuver. The echo of the blowout, the scream filled my mind. Was this the moment? Would the strain of the maneuver be what caused the tire to fail? The radio crackled to life again. It wasn't my voice this time. It was a soft, gentle female voice, a voice I didn't recognize. It was singing, a lullaby, a simple, beautiful, and heartbreakingly sad melody. It was the kind of song a mother would sing to a child she was about to lose. The song was a strange, terrifying comfort. It felt like the canyon was trying to soothe me, to calm me before the inevitable end. I had a choice. I could stay here, trapped between a rock slide and a prophecy. Or I could take the risk, try to get around the rocks and face whatever was waiting for me. I thought of the lullaby. It wasn't a song of malice. It was a song of sorrow, of pity. Maybe the canyon wasn't trying to kill me. Maybe it was just showing me what was coming. Maybe it was giving me a chance to change it. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to die here. I turned my full attention to the maneuver. I ignored the drop, the prophecy, the lullaby that was still softly playing on the radio. I focused only on the truck, on the precise, delicate dance of steel and rubber required to get past the obstacle. I eased the truck forward, inch by agonizing inch. I could feel the passenger side wheels leave the pavement and bite into the soft dirt of the shoulder. I could feel the trailer tilt slightly, a terrifying lean towards the abyss. I held my breath, my knuckles white. I cleared the rock slide. I pulled the truck back onto the solid pavement, my body shaking with relief. I had done it. I had cheated fate. I stopped the truck and finally got out, my legs weak. I walked to the back of the rig, my flashlight beam shaking. I knelt down and looked at the tires on the passenger side. They were all perfectly fine, fully inflated. No signs of wear or damage. There was no weak tire. There was no impending blowout. I stood up, confused. What did it mean? Had I misunderstood the warning? Had my careful driving been what saved me? As I stood there pondering the mystery, the lullaby on the radio faded out, replaced by a new sound. It was the sound of the rock slide I had just passed. But it wasn't the sound of it sitting there. It was the sound of it happening. The deep cracking groan of the canyon wall giving way, the thunderous roar of tons of rock crashing down onto the pavement. It was a recording of an event that had happened minutes, maybe hours before I arrived. And then the final echo came. The radio crackled with the sound of a car, a small sedan driving fast. The sound of happy, laughing voices, a family on a road trip. Then the sound of the rock slide. The laughter turned to screams of terror, cut short by a final, sickening crunch of metal and rock. My blood turned to ice. The prophecy wasn't for me. The blowout I had heard, the scream. It wasn't my truck. It was the sound of that family's car, its tire blowing as it tried to swerve around the rock slide, sending it over the edge of the ravine. The rock slide hadn't been a random obstacle. It was the scene of the accident. An accident that, for me, hadn't happened yet. The canyon wasn't warning me about my own future. It was showing me someone else's. It was making me a witness to a tragedy before it occurred. The lullaby. It wasn't for me. It was for them. I ran back to my cab and grabbed the radio mic. "Mayday, Mayday!" I screamed, my voice raw with panic. "There's going to be an accident on Route 191 in the main canyon, a rock slide, a family. You have to close the road." The dispatcher's voice came back, confused. "Sir, who is this?" "We haven't had any reports of a rock slide on 191. "It hasn't happened yet," I yelled, knowing how insane I sounded. "You have to believe me, I heard it. The canyon, it told me. I don't know if they believed me, but I kept screaming into the radio, giving them the location, describing the rock slide, the car, everything. I stayed there, blocking the road with my rig for over an hour until I saw the flashing lights of a highway patrol car approaching from the north. I had stopped traffic. I had closed the road. The officer who got out was angry, ready to arrest me for obstruction. But as he was cuffing me, his radio squawked. A report from a geological sensor just a few miles south of our location. It had detected a major rock slide. The highway was completely blocked. They found the family's car stopped just a few hundred yards from the slide. They had seen my truck blocking the road and had stopped, confused and annoyed. They were the next car that would have entered the canyon. If I hadn't been there, they would have driven right into that death trap. The official report called me a hero. They said I had spotted the early signs of the rock slide and had taken extraordinary measures to prevent a tragedy. They didn't mention my insane ramblings about echoes and prophecies. They created a logical story to fit an illogical event, but I know the truth. I didn't save that family. The canyon did. For some reason, that ancient silent place chose me as its messenger. It used my past, my present, and a future that wasn't mine to weave a warning I couldn't ignore. I don't drive through that canyon anymore. I'm terrified of it. Not because I think it's evil, but because I don't understand it. It's a place where time doesn't flow. It pools. It's a place that remembers, and sometimes it remembers things that are yet to come. And I'm left with a question that haunts my quietest moments. How many other warnings are echoing through those silent canyons, just waiting for a driver lonely enough and scared enough to listen? Story 3. The Scarecrows of Highway 50. My name is Marcus. I'm a fuel hauler. I drive a tanker up and down the loneliest road in America, U.S. Route 50, as it cuts through the dead heart of Nevada. They put up signs for the tourists, calling it the loneliest road, trying to make it sound romantic. It's not. It's a place where the sky is too big, the silence is too loud, and the emptiness gets inside you. It's 100 miles between gas stations, 100 miles between signs of life. Out there, you learn that loneliness isn't just an absence of people, it's a presence. A living, breathing thing that watches you from the shimmering heat haze. And in that vast, watching emptiness, things can happen. Things that have no place in the logical world of diesel and asphalt. My story isn't about a ghost or a monster that jumped out at me. It's about something quieter, slower, and 1,000 times more terrifying. It's about the scarecrows. The run was a routine one, a weekly trip from the refinery in Salt Lake City to the small, isolated mining towns in central Nevada. The route takes you right through the Basin and Range Province, a seemingly endless series of desolate valleys separated by stark, barren mountain ranges. It's a landscape that hasn't changed much in 10,000 years. I'd been driving this route for years. I knew every curve, every landmark, every lonely abandoned ranch house. I knew about the old forgotten cornfield. It was about 50 miles east of a tiny town called Austin. It was a bizarre sight, a single large square field of dead brown corn stalks in the middle of the sagebrush desert. No farmhouse, no barn, no irrigation, just a field of dead corn surrounded by a rickety wooden fence. It was a local oddity, a failed agricultural experiment from a century ago, now just a strange, out-of-place landmark. And in the center of that field there were scarecrows. 3 of them. They were classic old-fashioned scarecrows made of rough burlap sacks, stuffed with straw and dressed in tattered, faded farm clothes. They were mounted on crude wooden crosses, their button eyes staring blankly out at the empty road. For years they had been a familiar, slightly creepy part of my drive. A weird piece of roadside art. They never changed. They just stood there year after year, slowly rotting under the brutal Nevada sun. Until one night in August. It was a sweltering, moonless night. The air was thick and still. I was about a mile away from the cornfield when I first noticed something was wrong. The scarecrows were usually just visible from the road, 3 small, dark figures in the distance. But tonight, they seemed closer, larger. I slowed the truck, peering into the darkness. It was hard to be sure, but it looked like they were no longer in the center of the field. They were standing at the edge of it, right by the fence that bordered the highway. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a distortion from the heat rising off the asphalt. Or maybe some local kids had moved them as a prank. I drove on, the image of the 3 figures standing at the edge of the field lingering in my mind. A week later, on my next run, I approached the field with a sense of unease. It was daytime now, the sun beating down mercilessly. As the field came into view, my blood ran cold. They had moved again. They were no longer inside the fence. They were on the shoulder of the road, the 3 of them, standing in a neat row on the gravel just a few feet from the white line of the highway. Their crude wooden crosses had been jammed into the hard, dry earth. They were facing my truck as I approached, their burlap sack heads tilted at an unnatural angle, their button eyes seeming to follow me. I slowed the truck to a crawl, staring at them. They were just scarecrows, burlap straw and old clothes. But seeing them there out of the field, standing on the edge of the road like silent, waiting sentinels, it was deeply, profoundly wrong. The straw stuffing spilling from their torn bodies looked less like straw and more like dried, desiccated flesh. The faded flannel shirts and overalls looked like the clothes of dead men. I sped up, my heart pounding. This was not a prank. No one would haul 3 heavy, awkward scarecrows out of a field and set them up so perfectly on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. There was an intelligence to this, a purpose. And it was directed at me. The following week I was filled with a dreadful anticipation as I drove towards the cornfield. I told myself they would be gone, that the highway department would have removed them. They weren't gone. They had crossed the road. They were now standing on the shoulder of the opposite lane, the westbound side. They had moved directly across the 2-lane highway. I had to swerve slightly to avoid them. They were closer now, so close I could see the crude stitching on their burlap faces, the way the wind fluttered their tattered clothes. And I could swear with a certainty that made me feel physically ill that their heads turned to follow my truck as I passed. The fear was no longer just a prickle. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. This was a slow, deliberate, and impossible progression. Each week on my run, they were moving. They were closing a distance. But to what end? I started documenting it. I bought a disposable camera and began taking pictures each week. The photos were terrifying in their mundane clarity. Week 1, the scarecrows in the field. Week 2, at the fence. Week 3, on the eastbound shoulder. Week 4, on the westbound shoulder. It was a slow, methodical invasion of my reality. I tried taking a different route, but there were none. Highway 50 is the only artery through that part of the state. I thought about reporting it, but who would I report it to? The police? What would I say? The scarecrows are moving? They would lock me up. The 5th week, they were gone from the roadside. I felt a surge of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. It was over. The prank was done. The nightmare had ended. The relief lasted for about 10 miles. I was driving, the setting sun in my eyes, when I saw a figure standing in the middle of my lane, about a quarter mile ahead. It was one of the scarecrows. It was just standing there, its arms outstretched in that classic cruciform pose, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, my tanker truck fishtailing slightly as it skidded to a halt about 50 feet from the figure. I sat there, my engine idling, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. It was just a scarecrow, a thing of straw and wood. I could just run it over, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a fear so absolute, so primal, that it felt like my muscles had turned to stone. The scarecrow didn't move. It just stood there, its blank button eyes fixed on me. The sun set behind it, silhouetting it, turning it into a terrifying cruciform monolith against a blood-red sky. I put the truck in reverse. I was going to back up, turn around, and drive the 200 miles back to the last town. As I started to reverse, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and I saw the other two. They were standing in the road behind my truck, blocking my retreat. I was trapped, boxed in by these silent, impossible sentinels. I was trapped on a lonely road in the middle of the Nevada desert by 3 things made of straw and old clothes. The absurdity of the situation was drowned out by the sheer, overwhelming terror. I sat there for what felt like hours as darkness fell completely. The 3 figures remained motionless, silent silhouettes in the sweep of my headlights and taillights. I tried my radio. Static, my cell phone. No signal. I was utterly, completely alone with them. Around midnight, the one in front of me began to move. It wasn't a human movement. It was a slow, jerky, unnatural twitching, its head tilted, a motion that should have been impossible for a head sewn from burlap. Its straw-stuffed arms began to lower slowly, creakily. It took a step. A stiff, dragging, shambling step. It was walking towards my truck. The whispers from the first story, Hector's story, might have been in his head. This was real. I was watching a thing that should not be able to move. Move. The sound of its crude wooden feet dragging on the asphalt was the most horrifying sound I have ever heard. It shambled closer, its movements becoming slightly more fluid, more practiced with each step. As it entered the full glare of my headlights, I could see the details of its transformation. The straw that was visible through the tears in its clothes was no longer yellow and dry. It was dark, wet and matted, and it seemed to be writhing, twisting like a nest of worms. The button eyes were no longer blank. A faint, malevolent red light glowed deep within them. It was not a scarecrow anymore. It was something wearing a scarecrow as a suit, something that had animated it, given it a semblance of life and a terrible single-minded purpose. It reached the front of my truck. It was tall, much taller than it had appeared from a distance, its head level with the top of my windshield. It raised a stiff, straw-filled hand and placed it on the hood of my truck. I felt the impact, a heavy, solid thump that shook the entire cab. Then it began to climb. It moved with a horrifying insect-like scuttling, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It crawled onto the hood, its button eyes burning into me through the windshield. I could hear its straw and burlap body scraping against the metal. It was coming for me. In that moment, my paralysis broke. A surge of pure, survival-driven adrenaline flooded my system. I didn't think. I just acted. I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The truck roared forward directly at the scarecrow that had been in front of me. The creature on my hood shrieked, a dry, rustling, insectile sound as it was thrown off. I hit the standing scarecrow head-on. There was no satisfying crunch. There was just a soft, heavy, wet impact, like hitting a large sack of mud. I didn't slow down. I looked in my rearview mirror. The two scarecrows that had been behind me were now shambling, running after my truck with an unnatural, loping gait, their forms receding into the darkness. I drove through the rest of the night in a state of pure, mindless terror. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of the next town. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, leaving the engine running, and stumbled out of my cab, shaking and sobbing. The front of my truck was covered in a dark, thick, foul-smelling ooze, filled with what looked like black rotted straw and splinters of wood. But there was no body. There was no sign of the scarecrow I had hit. It was as if it had simply dissolved on impact. I quit my job the next day. I sold my truck. I moved to a city, a place with no empty roads, no vast, silent spaces. I surrounded myself with people and noise, trying to drown out the memory of that night. I did some research late at night in the safety of my locked apartment. I found old, forgotten local legends from that area of Nevada. Stories from the 19th century settlers about hungry fields and guardian spirits that the local Paiute tribes warned them about. The legends said that certain fields were gateways, places where things from a dry, dying world could cross over into ours. They would animate the husks of the harvest, the corn stalks, the scarecrows, and use them to hunt. They were drawn to solitary travelers, to the life force that moved through the emptiness they coveted. I don't know what those things were, but I know they are still out there in that lonely cornfield in the middle of the Nevada desert. And I know they are still watching the road, waiting. They are patient. They have all the time in the world. They stand and they watch and they wait, and every so often they take a slow, shambling step closer to the road, because the loneliest road in America is their hunting ground, and we are the harvest. My name is Dennis. I'm a company driver hauling dry goods, canned food, paper towels, the mundane stuff that keeps America running. For 20 years, my life has been a predictable loop, warehouse to highway to distribution center, then back again. I'm not a man given to flights of fancy. I believe in diesel, steel, and the reliability of a well-maintained engine. My world is governed by logbooks, schedules, and the unwavering physics of the road. But one starless night on a forgotten stretch of highway in the Texas Panhandle, my truck broke down. And in the crushing silence that followed, I found a piece of technology I thought was long dead. It wasn't. And neither was the man on the other end of the line. The route was a shortcut, a 2-lane state highway that promised to shave a few hours off my trip to Dallas. It was a bad decision. The road was in terrible shape, a patchwork of cracked asphalt and gravel that cut through a landscape so flat and featureless it felt like the edge of the world. There were no towns, no houses, no lights, just the endless empty plains and a sky choked with clouds that swallowed the moon. It was around 2 a.m. when it happened. A sudden violent clank from under the hood, followed by a series of grinding mechanical death rattles. The engine seized, the power steering died. The lights flickered and went out. My 40-ton rig coasted to a dead stop in the middle of the road, plunging me into an absolute terrifying darkness and silence. Every trucker's worst nightmare. Stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. I tried my cell phone. No service. Of course, I was in a dead zone, 100 miles from anywhere. My company's satellite-based emergency system was also dead, likely fried by whatever had killed my engine. I was completely and utterly cut off from the world. I sat there for an hour, a cold, heavy dread settling in my gut. The silence was the worst part. It was so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing in on the cab. There were no crickets, no wind, no distant sound of traffic. Just the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged in the dark. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait for a miracle. Dawn was hours away, and there was no guarantee another vehicle would even use this road. I had to find help. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, a couple of road flares, and a bottle of water. I locked my cab and stepped out into the oppressive darkness. The air was cold and damp. The only thing I could see was the small circle of gravel illuminated by my flashlight beam. I decided to walk east, the direction I'd been heading. I figured I had to be closer to something than to nothing. I walked for what felt like an eternity. The silence of the plains was unnerving. It felt unnatural, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Every crunch of my boots on the gravel sounded like a gunshot. I kept imagining things in the darkness just beyond the edge of my flashlight beam. Coyotes or worse. After about 2 miles of walking, I saw it. A faint, solitary point of light in the distance. It wasn't moving. It was a steady, pale glow. Hope, sharp and painful, surged through me. A house? A gas station? As I got closer, my hope curdled back into confusion and unease. It wasn't a house. It was a phone booth, a single, solitary, old-fashioned glass and metal phone booth, standing alone on the side of this deserted highway. It was a relic from another era, a ghost of a forgotten time. Its internal light was on, casting a sickly, pale rectangle of light onto the cracked asphalt. The phone inside, a heavy black rotary model, was hanging neatly on its hook. It made no sense. There were no power lines, no phone lines running alongside the road. Where was it getting its power? How was it connected? But in my desperation, logic took a back seat. If there was a phone, there was a chance. I pulled open the creaking glass door and stepped inside. The air inside the booth was stale and smelled of rust and ozone. The light from the single bulb above was weak, but it was light. I picked up the heavy, cold receiver. My heart was pounding. I put it to my ear, and I heard a dial tone, a clean, steady, perfect dial tone. My hands were shaking as I fumbled in my pocket for a quarter. I found one. Its familiar weight a small anchor to reality. I pushed it into the slot. It dropped with a satisfying clink. I dialed 911, my finger clumsy on the old rotary dial. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. But it wasn't the calm, professional voice of a 911 operator. It was a man's voice, rough and panicked, laced with static. "Can't see. The smoke is everywhere. She's not breathing. Oh, no, God, she's not breathing." "Hello?" I shouted into the receiver. "Hello, I need help. My truck broke down." The voice on the other end didn't seem to hear me. It was like I was listening to a recording or a crossed line. "The flames. It's too hot, or I can't get the door open. I'm trapped." The voice dissolved into a fit of desperate, racking coughs, then a final choked scream of agony, then silence. I stood there, frozen, the receiver pressed to my ear. I had just listened to a man burn to death. I slammed the phone down, my body trembling. What in God's name had I just connected to? Was it a prank? A recording? I pushed open the door of the booth, gasping for fresh air. I was about to start walking, again to get as far away from this cursed phone booth as possible, when I heard it. The phone inside the booth started to ring. A loud, shrill, old-fashioned ring that cut through the night like a knife. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to not answer it. But I was mesmerized. Who could possibly be calling a forgotten payphone in the middle of the Texas Panhandle at 3 a.m.? Slowly, as if in a trance, I stepped back into the booth. I lifted the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered. "He's coming for you," a voice rasped on the other end. It was the same man's voice, the one I had heard screaming. But now it was different. It was weak, hoarse, and filled with an ethereal, echoing quality, as if it were coming from a great distance. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You shouldn't have used my phone," the voice whispered. "This is my line. I'm the only one who gets to make a call. Now he knows you're there. He knows you're on his road." "He? Who is he?" "The one who collects the toll," the voice rasped. "I didn't have anything to give him. So he took me. He took my truck. He took my fire. Now he's coming for you. You have to run." "I don't understand," I pleaded. "My truck broke down. I just need help." "There is no help on this road," the voice sighed, a sound like wind through a broken window. "There is only him. He smells the broken down, the stranded, the desperate. It's a trap. The road breaks you down and then he comes to collect the pieces. I tried to warn them. I called 911, but I was already burning." Suddenly I understood. The panicked call I had overheard, it was this man's own final call echoing through time. "Who are you?" I whispered. "My name was Frank," the voice said, seeming to struggle with the memory. "I was a trucker, like you. This was my last run 20 years ago tonight." The phone line crackled with a burst of static. "He's close," Frank's ghost whispered. "I can feel him. He moves in the silence between the heartbeats. Look for the lights. Don't let them get you." Run. The line went dead. As I stood there clutching the silent receiver, I saw them. In the distance, back in the direction of my broken-down truck, two small points of light appeared on the horizon. Headlights. A vehicle was coming. Relief, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. Help was coming. A patrol car, another trucker, it didn't matter. I was saved. I stepped out of the phone booth, ready to flag the vehicle down. But as the lights got closer, the relief turned back into cold, hard dread. The lights were wrong. They were not the warm white headlights of a modern vehicle. They were a pair of dim, flickering yellow lights, like old gas lamps. And they were moving too fast, too silently. There was no engine noise, just the sound of the wind. Frank's warning echoed in my mind. "Look for the lights. Don't let them get you." This was him, the collector. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, plunging into the darkness of the plains, away from the road. I ran blindly, stumbling over rocks and through thorny brush. My only guide, the memory of the road's direction. Behind me, I could hear a sound that did not belong in this world. It was the sound of an ancient groaning engine and the creak of old leather and wood, and a high, thin whistling sound like a lonely, malevolent wind. I risked a glance over my shoulder. A vehicle was now sitting on the road next to the glowing phone booth. It was an old, dilapidated tow truck, the kind from the 1930s or 40s. It was rusted, battered, and seemed to be held together by sheer force of will. There was no driver visible in the cab. The two flickering yellow headlights on its grille looked like malevolent watching eyes. A hook and chain descended from the back of the tow truck, moving with a silent, snake-like grace. It slithered across the asphalt and wrapped itself around the base of the phone booth. With a groan of protesting metal, the tow truck began to drag the entire phone booth away, pulling it into the darkness. It was collecting its property. I didn't watch any longer. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed in a ditch, my body screaming in protest, and I hid, praying that the dawn would come. I must have passed out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of a voice. "Sir? Sir, are you okay?" I opened my eyes. A state trooper was kneeling over me. The sun was up. The sky was a brilliant clear blue. I told him my story. The breakdown, the walk, the phone booth, the ghost, the tow truck. He listened patiently, then helped me to my feet and drove me back to my rig. My truck was sitting on the side of the road exactly where I had left it. But it wasn't broken anymore. The trooper turned the key, and the engine roared to life, perfectly fine. There was no sign of any mechanical failure. And the phone booth? It was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. Just a patch of cracked, empty asphalt on the side of a lonely road. The trooper drove me to the nearest town and had me checked out by a doctor. The official report said I had suffered from exhaustion and dehydration, likely causing a vivid hallucination. A micro-sleep event, they called it. But I know what I saw and I know what I heard. When I got to a library, I did some research. I looked through old newspaper archives from that county, and I found it. A small article from a newspaper dated 20 years ago to the day of my breakdown. It reported a fatal accident on that same stretch of highway. A tanker truck driven by a man named Frank had blown a tire and crashed, bursting into flames. The driver was killed. The article mentioned that in his final moments he had been trying to make a call on his CB radio for help. I also found other stories, local legends, ghost stories told by the old-timers. They talked about the wrecker of the plains, a phantom, tow truck that appears on deserted roads, drawn to the desperate and the stranded. They say it's driven by a spirit that collects the tolls from those who die on his roads. Not a toll of money or memory, a toll of fire and steel and souls. I believe that phone booth was a trap, a beacon. It was Frank's final desperate call for help, echoing through time, trapped in a loop. But it was also a lure for the wrecker. When I used it, I stepped into Frank's echo, into his tragedy. And the wrecker, the collector, came for me. Frank's ghost, trapped in the wires, gave me a warning. He gave me the chance he never had, the chance to run. I don't drive the back roads anymore. I stick to the busy interstates, the places filled with light and noise and other people. Because I know that the silence of the empty places is not empty, it's listening. And the ghosts of the road are still out there, making their final desperate calls, and if you're unlucky enough to answer, the collector will come for you too. Story 5. The cargo that remembers my name is Arthur. I'm what they call a specialty hauler. I don't move produce or machine parts, I move history. My clients are wealthy collectors, museums, and historical societies. I transport antiques, artifacts, entire collections from one end of the country to the other. It's a delicate, high-stakes job. You're not just hauling old furniture, you're hauling the fragile, irreplaceable remnants of the past. I've learned that old things, especially things that were loved or cherished, have a kind of weight to them that has nothing to do with gravity. They have a presence. They hold echoes of the lives they were a part of. I always thought of it as a metaphor, a poetic way of looking at my job. After one particular run, a journey through the silent, forgotten backroads of New England, I no longer believe it's a metaphor. I believe some things don't just hold echoes, they hold the ghosts themselves. The job was an estate transport. A wealthy, eccentric collector in rural Vermont had passed away, and his entire collection had been purchased by a private buyer in Charleston, South Carolina. The collection was eclectic and strange. Antique clocks, vintage music boxes, old photographs, Victorian-era mourning jewelry, and a large number of what the manifest described as personal effects from a 19th-century asylum. The client insisted on a single, dedicated, climate-controlled truck. No stops at depots, no sharing the trailer, Just a straight shot door to door. The pay was substantial, so I agreed. The pickup location was a sprawling Gothic revival mansion deep in the Green Mountains. The place was like something out of a horror novel, all dark wood, towering spires, and windows that looked like vacant eyes. The air was heavy with the smell of dust, decay, and old paper. The loading crew was a team of professional art handlers, quiet and reverent as they carefully packed the trailer with dozens of undone wooden crates, each one stenciled with a lot number and the words, "Fragile, handle with extreme care." The lead handler, a stern older woman, gave me the final paperwork. "The climate control is the most critical part, Mr. Jennings," she said, her voice low and serious. "The temperature and humidity must remain absolutely constant. These items are sensitive to change." There was a strange emphasis on the word sensitive that I didn't understand at the time. I sealed the trailer and pulled out of the long, winding driveway, leaving the dark mansion to its silence. The first few hours of the drive were peaceful. The rolling hills of Vermont gave way to the highways of Massachusetts. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees a riot of red and gold. The strangeness began as night fell and I moved onto the quieter, more deserted state highways of Connecticut. It started with a sound, a single clear musical note like a chime. It was so faint I thought I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. Ting, a perfect crystalline note hanging in the air for a moment before fading. It was coming from the trailer. I pulled over and checked the cargo. Everything was secure. The crates were exactly where they had been loaded. I stood inside the dark, climate-controlled trailer listening. Silence. I figured a piece of crystal or glass must have shifted in its crate. I closed the doors and drove on. But the sounds didn't stop. They grew. Soon it wasn't just a single chime. It was a melody. A faint, tinkling, out-of-tune melody, the kind an old, forgotten music box would play. It was a children's lullaby, a simple, sweet tune, but hearing it faint and ghostly coming from the sealed cargo behind me in the dead of night was deeply unsettling. It was as if one of the antique music boxes had decided to start playing all by itself. I tried to ignore it, turning up my radio. But the melody seemed to weave itself in and out of the music, a phantom harmony that didn't belong. Later that night, a new sound joined the music box, a rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock. It was the sound of a clock, not just one clock, but dozens of them, all starting at once. A chorus of ticking grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, and pocket watches, all falling into a perfect, synchronized rhythm. The sound was maddening. A relentless mechanical heartbeat counting down to something. The music box played on, its sad little melody now a counterpoint to the relentless ticking. I was driving through a rolling sea of sound, a symphony of the past playing out in the darkness behind me. I felt like I was hauling a haunted house on wheels. I called the number for the art handler. She answered on the first ring as if she had been expecting my call. I told her about the sounds. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Jennings," she said finally, her voice tight. "The items are settling. The change in location, the vibration of the road, it can cause residual energy to manifest. It is perfectly normal for this collection. Just maintain the climate control and continue to your destination. Do not, under any circumstances, open the crates." Residual energy. It was a clinical, detached term for what was happening, but it did nothing to calm my nerves. I was hauling a trailer full of possessed antiques. The next day, as I drove through the Carolinas, the sounds changed again. The ticking and the music faded, replaced by something far more intimate and disturbing. Whispers. They were faint, like the rustle of dry leaves seeping into the cab from the trailer. At first they were just indistinct murmurs, the sound of a distant crowd. But as I listened, as I drove deeper into the lonely back roads, the whispers became clearer. They were voices, the voices of men, women, and children, all speaking at once. They weren't speaking to me. They were speaking to each other. I was eavesdropping on the conversations of ghosts. I heard a woman, her voice choked with tears, whispering the name Eleanor. I heard a man angrily muttering about a business deal gone wrong. I heard two children giggling as they shared a secret. I heard a young woman humming the same sad lullaby the music box had been playing. These weren't just random echoes. These were the lives, the moments, the emotions that had been absorbed by the objects in my trailer. The old clocks had absorbed the endless ticking moments of the lives they had measured. The music boxes held the memory of the children they had soothed to sleep. The photographs held the whispered secrets of the people they depicted. And the items from the asylum, they held the madness. As night fell on the second day, the whispers began to change. The gentle, nostalgic conversations faded, replaced by sounds of fear, of pain, of insanity. I heard a woman screaming, a raw, terrified sound that went on and on. I heard a man weeping, not with grief, but with the hopeless, broken sobs of a shattered mind. I heard a doctor, his voice cold and clinical, describing a procedure in horrifying detail. I heard the clink of medical instruments and the soft, wet sound of something I didn't want to identify. The air in my cab grew cold. The sweet, musty smell of old things was replaced by the sharp, antiseptic smell of a hospital and the faint, coppery tang of old blood. The whispers were no longer just in the trailer. They were in the cab with me. They were in my head. I felt a presence in the passenger seat next to me. I didn't dare look, but I could feel a cold spot, a weight, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. A woman's voice, the one who had been screaming, whispered directly in my ear. "He said it wouldn't hurt." I yelled and swerved the truck, almost running off the road. I was losing my grip. The ghosts were no longer contained in their objects. They were leaking out. They were in the truck with me. I had to get this cargo to its destination. I had to get it out of my truck. I drove through the night, a gibbering, terrified madman, the cab of my truck a cacophony of weeping, screaming, and insane whispers. I felt hands on my shoulder. I saw fleeting shapes in my mirrors. The ghosts of the asylum were awake, and they were confused, and they were angry. I finally pulled up to the delivery address in Charleston at dawn. It was a modern, sterile-looking building, a private museum or research facility. The same team of quiet, professional art handlers was there to meet me. As they opened the trailer doors, a wave of cold, stale air and the cacophony of whispers washed over us. The handlers didn't flinch. They seemed to expect it. They began to unload the crates, their faces impassive. I got out of my cab, my body trembling, my mind a wreck. The lead handler, the same woman from Vermont, walked over to me. "Was the journey eventful, Mr. Jennings?" she asked, her face a blank mask. "Eventful?" I croaked. "Your cargo is haunted. It's full of ghosts. They were in my truck, in my head." She gave me a small, sad smile. "Not ghosts, Mr. Jennings. Imprints. Strong emotional events, moments of great joy or great suffering can leave an imprint on the objects nearby. A kind of psychic residue. The man who owned this collection. He didn't collect objects. He collected imprints. He sought out items that had been present at moments of extreme human emotion. He was a collector of souls, in a manner of speaking." She gestured to the building. "This facility is designed to contain them. The climate control, the electromagnetic shielding, it keeps the imprints dormant, keeps them from bleeding. The journey, the constant motion, it agitated them, it woke them up." I stared at her, horrified. You knew this would happen, and you didn't warn me." "A warning would have been counterproductive," she said coolly. "It would have primed your mind for the experience, made you more susceptible. We find it's better for the drivers not to know. Most of them just dismiss it as a strange, stressful trip. You seem to be more sensitive. I watched as they carried the last crate into the building. As the heavy vault-like doors closed, the whispers in my head finally blessedly fell silent. The air grew warm again. The world felt normal. The handler gave me my payment, a check with a significant bonus added. "For your trouble," she said. As I was about to leave, I had to ask one more question. "The music box," I said, "the lullaby. What was that?" Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, and a look of genuine sadness crossed her face. "That was from a child's nursery. The music box belonged to a little girl who died of fever in the 1890s. Her mother would wind it for her every night. The imprint is particularly strong. It's the memory of a mother's love and her grief." I drove away from that place, my mind a hollowed-out shell. I had been a ferryman for the dead, a trucker for ghosts. I had carried their joy, their sorrow, and their madness with me for 1,000 miles. I finished my career without another incident, but the experience changed me. I can't be around old things anymore. I can't go into antique shops or museums. Because now, when I touch an old object, I can feel it, a faint echo, a whisper of the life it once knew. I learned that the past is never truly dead, it just sleeps. It sleeps in the wood of an old chair, in the gears of a forgotten clock, in the faded silver of a photograph. And sometimes when you move it, when you disturb its rest, it wakes up, and it remembers. Story 6. The Painted Line. My name is Will. I'm a contract driver, which is a polite way of saying I'm a trucker without a home. I don't have a regular route or a steady company. I live out of my cab, picking up jobs from a digital load board, chasing the money wherever it leads me. My life is dictated by two things: my GPS and the painted lines on the road. The GPS tells me where to go, and the lines keep me from dying on the way there. They are the most fundamental rule of the road, the one constant in a world of changing landscapes and endless miles. The white lines separate you from the shoulder, the yellow lines from oncoming death. You trust them. You have to. They are the language of the highway, a silent, unwavering guide. But one night, on a desolate, forgotten highway in the Texas Big Bend region, I learned that sometimes the road has a mind of its own. And sometimes the lines don't guide you. They hunt you. The job was a strange one from the start. I was to pick up a sealed, empty container from a depot in El Paso and haul it to a decommissioned military base deep in the Big Bend wilderness. Why anyone would want an empty container delivered to an abandoned base in the middle of nowhere was a question I learned long ago not to ask. The pay was excellent and the instructions were simple. Follow the provided route exactly, arrive after dark, and leave the container at a designated unlit drop point. The route took me down a series of increasingly remote and poorly maintained farm-to-market roads. The sun had set hours ago, and the world outside my cab was a vast, impenetrable blackness. The kind of darkness you only find in the deep desert, far from the light pollution of any city. My headlights cut a lonely, narrow tunnel through the night. My GPS was my only guide, its calm, synthesized voice a comforting presence in the crushing silence. "In 2 miles, turn right onto County Road 410, the GPS instructed. I made the turn. The asphalt immediately gave way to a rough, packed dirt road. This was it, the final stretch, a 20-mile straight shot to the abandoned base. The road was arrow straight, a perfect line drawn across the flat, scrub-covered desert. It was also in terrible condition, and there were no painted lines. Just the dark, rutted dirt stretching into the blackness. I drove for about 10 minutes, the truck, rattling and groaning. Then up ahead, my headlights picked up something that shouldn't have been there. a freshly painted brilliant white line appearing as if from nowhere, running perfectly down the center of the dirt road. I slowed down, confused. It made no sense. Why would the county waste money painting a line on a decommissioned, unpaved road in the middle of nowhere? The line was perfect, too. A crisp, clean, unbroken stripe of white, glowing with an almost supernatural intensity in my headlights. It looked like it had been painted just minutes ago. Despite the strangeness, I was grateful for it. The line gave me a point of reference in the disorienting darkness. It was a guide. I centered my truck on it and continued, my eyes locked on the glowing stripe as it unspooled before me. After a few miles, I noticed something else was wrong. The line was beginning to glow, not just reflecting my headlights, but emitting its own faint, pale, phosphorescent light. It was a soft, cold, white light like moonlight on snow. I could have turned off my headlights and still been able to follow it. A cold knot of fear began to form in my stomach. This was not paint. I didn't know what it was, but it was not paint. I thought about stopping, about turning back. But I was halfway to my destination, and the idea of reversing down this narrow, dark road was just as terrifying as going forward. I kept driving, my gaze fixed on the impossible glowing line. That's when it began to move. It was subtle at first, a slight, gentle curve to the left, where the road ahead was still perfectly straight. I followed it, assuming it was just a bend in the road I couldn't see yet, but the road remained straight. The line was deviating, leading me away from the packed dirt track and onto the open desert. I tried to correct, to steer my truck back onto the road, but I couldn't. It was the strangest, most terrifying sensation of my life. It felt like the truck's steering was locked, as if some powerful magnetic force was gripping my front wheels and forcing them to follow the glowing line. I was no longer driving the truck. The line was. It led me off the road, the truck bumping and lurching over the rough desert terrain. The glowing white line was now my only path, a river of cold light flowing through the darkness. It curved and weaved through the sagebrush and cacti, leading me deeper and deeper into the empty desert. My GPS was going haywire, the screen flashing, recalculating, before finally going dark with a soft pop. The whispers from Arthur's story, the antique hauler, were a cacophony. This was different. This was a silent, cold, and deliberate abduction. The line was pulling me, luring me somewhere. After what felt like an hour of this terrifying, automated journey, I saw a structure ahead, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky. It was a single, massive, windowless building made of a smooth, black, non-reflective material. It looked like a piece of the night sky had been cut out and placed on the desert floor. It was the decommissioned military base, my destination. But there was no fence, no gate, no sign of life. Just this monolithic black cube and the glowing white line that led directly to a large hangar-like opening in its side. The line did not stop at the entrance. It continued inside, into the pitch-black interior of the building. And my truck, against my will, followed it. I was fighting the steering wheel with all my strength, my muscles screaming in protest, but it was useless. The truck rolled slowly, inexorably, into the gaping black maw of the building. The moment my trailer cleared the entrance, the massive door slid shut behind me with a heavy final thud, plunging me into an absolute suffocating darkness. My headlights, which had been my only source of light, flickered and died. The engine sputtered and went silent. I was in a black, silent tomb, but I was not alone. The glowing white line was still there on the floor, a single luminous path leading deeper into the darkness. And then, other lines began to appear. All around me, a complex geometric grid of glowing white lines began to form on the floor, the walls, the ceiling. They intersected, branched, and formed complex patterns that looked like a circuit board. or a map of a city seen from above. I was inside a machine, a massive, silent, and now active machine. I sat in my dead truck, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like my heart had stopped. For a long time, nothing happened. There was just the silent, glowing grid and the crushing, absolute silence. Then I heard a sound. A soft, scraping sound. It was coming from outside the truck. I peered through my windshield into the dimly lit darkness, and I saw them. Figures were emerging from the walls, from the floor, from the glowing lines themselves. They were tall and impossibly thin, their bodies made of the same pale, white, luminous material as the lines. They were two-dimensional, flat, like living drawings that had peeled themselves off the grid. They had no features, no faces, no eyes. They were just pure, white, geometric shapes that moved with a silent, fluid grace. They were beings of light, of lines. They glided towards my truck, their movements silent and purposeful. They surrounded the rig, their featureless heads tilted as if they were studying it, examining it. One of them, taller than the rest, glided to the driver's side door. It didn't have hands, but its flat, linear body seemed to phase through the metal of the door. I heard the click of the lock and my door swung open. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could only watch as the flat, white, featureless face of the line being filled my vision. It didn't touch me, but I felt a sensation like a cold electric current passing through my entire body. It was in my head. It was reading me, scanning me, like a piece of data. I felt it sifting through my memories, my thoughts, my emotions. It wasn't a violent or painful process. It was cold, clinical, and utterly detached. It was like a computer scanning a file. I felt it access my knowledge of the highway system, my understanding of logistics, my years of experience navigating the country. It was learning from me. It was downloading me. As it scanned me, it began to communicate, not with words, but with pure, direct concepts, downloaded straight into my consciousness. I understood with a sudden, terrifying clarity what this place was. This was not a military base. This was a nexus, a central hub for a vast, non-human intelligence that existed within the very infrastructure of the country. The painted lines on the roads were not just paint. They were a network, a nervous system, a web of consciousness that spanned the continent. And this place, this black cube in the desert, was its brain. The beings, the line walkers as my mind named them, were its antibodies, its maintenance crews. They traveled the network, repairing it, maintaining it, and observing the biological traffic that moved across their system. They were ancient, and they were patient. They had been here long before the roads were paved, existing as faint, unseen energy ley lines in the earth. When we built our highways, we had unknowingly paved over their nervous system, giving them a new, more efficient network to inhabit. They were not hostile. They were simply curious. And they were learning. They were studying our patterns, our logistics, our destinations. They were learning how our world worked by observing the traffic that flowed through their veins. And they had brought me here for a reason. My empty container was not the cargo. I was. The lead line walker finished its scan. It communicated a final concept to me: upgrade. It showed me a vision. It showed me the highway system of the entire country, a glowing, intricate web of light. And it showed me how to see it as they did, not as roads, but as pathways of pure information. It offered me a choice. I could be returned, my memory of the event wiped clean, sent back to my world of diesel and asphalt. Or I could accept the upgrade. I could become a part of their network. I could become a new kind of driver, one who could navigate not just the physical roads, but the informational pathways that lay beneath them. I could become a courier for them, transporting something. between the nexus points that were hidden across the country. The offer was terrifying, and it was tempting. To see the world as they did, to understand the secret language of the road. But I also understood the price. I would no longer be fully human. I would be a part of their system, a tool, a node in their network. No, I thought, the single word a desperate scream in the silence of my mind. I want to go back. The line walker seemed to consider this. It showed me one final image. It showed me my truck back on the dirt road, the engine running, the GPS working. It showed me the path back to the highway. And it showed me the price of refusal. In the vision, I looked in my rearview mirror, and the road behind me was gone. Not just the dirt road, but the highway, the towns, everything. There was just a black, empty void. The vision was a clear, cold threat. If I refused, they wouldn't just wipe my memory, they would wipe my path. They would erase me from the map. I would be a driver with no road to drive on. I was trapped. There was no choice. I accept, I thought, the words a surrender. The cold electric sensation intensified for a moment, a final searing download of information. I felt a fundamental change in my perception, a rewiring of my senses. I could suddenly feel the entire highway grid of North America as a tingling presence in the back of my mind. I could sense the flow of traffic, the location of every vehicle, the status of every road. Then the line walker withdrew. The figures glided back into the walls. The glowing grid on the floor faded. The massive door slid open, revealing the dark desert night outside. My truck's engine roared to life on its own. The headlights flickered on. I was no longer in control. The truck, guided by the glowing line, drove itself out of the black cube and back onto the desert. It followed the line back to the dirt road and then back to the main highway. The moment my tires touched the highway's asphalt, the glowing line vanished. The control of the truck was returned to me. I delivered the empty container to the abandoned base, which now looked exactly like an abandoned base should. Derelict, fenced, and empty. I left the container at the drop point and drove away. My life is different now. On the surface, I'm still a trucker. I still haul loads. But my GPS is always off. I don't need it anymore. I can see the roads in my mind. I can see the best routes, the hidden shortcuts, the traffic jams before they happen. I am the most efficient driver on the road. But I also see the other things. I see the glowing lines that pulse beneath the asphalt. I see the line walkers, the flat white figures gliding along the highways at night, doing their silent, endless maintenance. They ignore me for the most part. I am part of the system now, and sometimes I get a new kind of job. It comes not from a load board, but as a direct, silent instruction in my mind. The instructions are simple. Pick up a sealed, empty container. Take it to a specific remote location. A place that isn't on any map. A black cube in a desert, a silent dome in a swamp. A forgotten facility in the mountains. I am their courier. I don't know what I'm truly transporting in those empty containers. Information? Energy? Something else? I don't ask. I just drive. I am their best driver. I am their ghost in the machine. I am a man who followed a painted line and found that it led not to a destination, but to a complete redefinition of the road itself. And I am forever a part of the silent, glowing, and terrifyingly intelligent network that lies just beneath the surface of the world we think we know. Story 7. The Diner at the Edge of the World. My name is Elias. I've spent the better part of my life hauling timber down from the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. It's a dangerous, beautiful, and deeply lonely job. You spend your days on winding, treacherous logging roads, your nights on deserted stretches of coastal highway where the fog rolls in so thick it feels like you're driving through milk. You get used to the isolation, You learn to find comfort in the small, brightly lit oases of civilization that dot the coastline. The gas stations, the motels, the all-night diners. They are anchors in a world of shifting fog and endless rain. But there's one diner, on a stretch of Oregon coast so remote it feels like the end of the earth, that isn't an anchor. It's the opposite. It's the place where the anchor chain breaks. The storm was a monster, one of those legendary Pacific tempests that comes screaming in off the ocean with hurricane-force winds and rain that falls in solid, blinding sheets. I was trying to make it south to Coos Bay with a full load of Douglas fir, but the highway was becoming a death trap. Trees were down, rock slides were being reported on the radio, and the wind was hitting my rig with enough force to make the trailer shudder and sway. My GPS showed a small town about 20 miles ahead, but I knew I wouldn't make it. I was looking for any wide spot, any turnout where I could safely park my rig and wait out the storm. It was through a momentary break in the torrential rain that I saw it. A single flickering neon sign half hidden by the thrashing trees. It read, "The Lighthouse Diner. Eat." It was a godsend, a miracle. The diner was perched on a rocky promontory, a cliff overlooking the raging black ocean. It was an old circular building, its large plate glass windows facing the storm, looking for all the world like the top of a lighthouse that had been converted into a restaurant. A small gravel parking lot, barely big enough for my rig and a few cars, was carved out of the cliffside next to it. I pulled in, the wind trying to tear the door from my hand as I got out. I ran through the deluge and pushed my way into the diner. The contrast was immediate and shocking. Outside was a world of chaotic, screaming violence. Inside was a pocket of absolute preternatural calm. The diner was warm, dry, and almost completely silent. The air smelled of salt, old coffee, and something else, something faint and floral like night-blooming jasmine. The interior was simple. A long formica counter with worn vinyl stools and a few booths that lined the massive curved windows looking out at the storm-tossed sea. But it was the patrons who froze me in my tracks. The diner was full, every stool and every booth occupied, and they were all doing the exact same thing. They were sitting perfectly still, their hands folded on the tables in front of them, and they were all staring out the windows at the raging ocean. They weren't talking. They weren't eating. They were just watching, waiting. Their faces were calm, serene, but their eyes held a strange, distant, almost hypnotic focus. They were people from all walks of life, a family with 2 young children, a group of what looked like college students, an elderly couple, a few other truckers like myself. But they were all united in this silent, shared vigil. A single waitress was moving silently through the room, refilling coffee cups that no one was drinking. She was a middle-aged woman with a kind, weary face and eyes that held a deep, ancient sadness. She glided over to me as I stood dripping by the door. "Rough night, traveler," she said, her voice a soft, gentle whisper that was somehow audible over the distant roar of the storm. "Come, sit. The coffee is hot, the storm will pass." She led me to the only empty seat, a single stool at the far end of the counter. She poured me a cup of coffee. It was black, strong, and incredibly good. "What's going on here?" I whispered, gesturing to the silent, watching crowd. "What is everyone looking at?" The waitress, whose name tag read Eleonora, polished a glass, her gaze fixed on her work. "They're waiting for the light," she said simply. "The light? You mean the dawn?" She gave me a small, sad smile. "No, honey. Not the dawn. The light. It only comes during the worst storms. This diner, it's not just a diner, it's a lighthouse. Or it used to be. The light at the top broke a long, long time ago. But something else took its place. Something from the sea." I stared at her, thinking she was speaking in metaphors or that she was a bit crazy. but her tone was so matter-of-fact, so serious. "People find this place when they need to," she continued, her voice a low murmur. "When they're lost in a storm, literally or figuratively, they come here for shelter, they sit, they watch, and they wait. For most of them, the storm outside passes, and they continue on their journey with only a strange memory of a quiet diner. But for some, for the ones who are truly lost, the storm inside is the one that matters, and they are the ones who see the light." A cold, uneasy feeling began to settle over me. I looked at the faces of the other patrons. Their serenity no longer looked peaceful. It looked resigned. The young couple in the booth nearest me were holding hands, their eyes fixed on the black, churning waves. The woman had tears silently streaming down her face, but her expression was one of blissful, heartbreaking acceptance. "What is this light?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a call," Eleonora said, "a promise of an end to storms, an end to pain, an end to the road. It comes from the water. A soft green light deep in the waves. It rises up and it shines into the diner. And it offers a choice." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "What choice?" "To stay or to go," she said, finally looking up at me, her sad eyes meeting mine. "You can finish your coffee, and when the storm breaks, you can get back in your truck and drive away. Or you can answer the call. You can walk out that door and you can go to the light." "Go where?" I pressed. "To the place where the storms end," she whispered. "To peace. To the bottom of the sea." The horror of her words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a diner. It was a way station, a departure lounge for the suicidal, the heartbroken, the terminally weary. It was a place that offered a final, terrible, beautiful escape. The patrons weren't waiting for the storm to end. They were waiting for an invitation to join it. I looked around the room again, and now I saw them clearly. I saw the faint track marks on the college kid's arm. I saw the grief-hollowed eyes of the father in the family booth. I saw the tremor in the old man's hands, the telltale sign of a terminal illness. They were all here because they had reached the end of their own deserted roads. And this diner, this place, had found them. You're helping them?" I stammered, horrified. "I am a keeper," Eleonora said, her voice filled with an infinite, weary compassion. "The lighthouse keeper. I provide a warm place, a hot cup of coffee, and a quiet moment to make the choice. I don't encourage, I don't discourage, I only serve." Suddenly a change occurred in the room. A collective soft gasp went through the patrons. Their bodies leaned forward, their focus intensifying. A young woman in one of the booths stood up, her face illuminated by a beatific, radiant smile. "It's here," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's so beautiful." I looked out the window, and I saw it. Deep beneath the churning black waves, a soft, gentle green light began to pulse. It was a beautiful, ethereal glow like captured moonlight, pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm like a cosmic heartbeat. It grew in intensity, casting a soft, green luminescence up through the water, illuminating the crashing waves from below. The light rose from the depths, a column of soft green energy that broke the surface of the water and shone directly into the plate glass windows of the diner. It filled the room with its gentle, silent, otherworldly glow. It didn't hurt to look at. It was comforting. It felt like peace. It felt like an end to all struggle. I felt a pull, a deep, seductive yearning to walk towards that light, to let it wash over me, to let it take away the endless miles, the loneliness, the exhaustion of my life. It was the most tempting thing I have ever felt. It was the promise of a final, perfect rest. The young woman who had stood up began to walk towards the door, her movements slow and graceful, as if in a trance. Her eyes never left the light. The other patrons watched her, their faces filled not with alarm, but with a kind of gentle, vicarious joy. They were happy for her. She had made her choice. "Don't," I heard myself say, my voice a choked whisper. Eleonora placed a gentle hand on my arm. "It is her choice, traveler," she said softly. "Her storm is over." The woman reached the door. She opened it, and for a moment the raging wind and rain of the real storm filled the diner, a harsh, violent contrast to the silent, peaceful green light. She was not deterred. She stepped out into the tempest and walked towards the edge of the cliff, towards the column of light. She didn't fall. She didn't jump. She simply, stepped into the light, and she was gone. The light embraced her, and then, with a final, gentle pulse, it receded back into the depths, taking her with it. The diner was silent for a long moment. Then the patrons all turned away from the window, as if a spell had been broken. They began to talk quietly amongst themselves. They started drinking their coffee. The man at the booth next to me started eating a piece of pie. It was as if nothing had happened. The show was over. "The light has chosen for tonight," Eleonora said, her voice heavy. "The rest must wait for another storm." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "How many?" I whispered. "How many have you seen?" "Go." She looked out at the dark ocean, her eyes filled with a sorrow as deep and as vast as the sea itself. "I stopped counting a long time ago," she said. "I have been the keeper here since my own ship was lost in a storm a lifetime ago. This diner is my penance, my purgatory. I serve those who are lost as I was lost. I offer them a choice I was never given." I understood then. She was a ghost, a spirit bound to this place, this strange lighthouse at the edge of the world. She was the first one to answer the light's call, and her payment was to become its eternal servant. I sat there until dawn, drinking coffee, not daring to sleep. As the first gray light of morning began to break, the storm subsided. The wind died down and the rain softened to a drizzle. The patrons began to stir, to gather their things. They were leaving. The elderly couple walked past me and nodded. "Safe travels," the old man said, his eyes clear and focused again. The family with the children left, the father giving me a small, grateful smile. They were returning to their lives, their moment of crisis past. The diner had offered them a choice, and they had chosen to live. For now. I was the last one to leave. I stood at the door and looked back at Eleonora. She was wiping down the counter, preparing for the next storm, the next influx of lost souls. "Will I find this place again?" I asked. "Only if you need to," she said, her sad smile returning. "But I hope for your sake, traveler, that you never do." I walked out into the clean, rain-washed morning. I got in my truck. As I pulled out of the gravel lot, I took one last look at the diner. It was already starting to fade, to dissolve into the morning mist, like a dream upon waking. By the time I reached the highway, it was gone. There was just a rocky, empty cliff where it had been. I delivered my load of timber. I told my dispatcher I had been stranded by the storm. I never spoke of the lighthouse diner. Who would believe me? But I know it's real, and I know it's still out there waiting. A quiet, warm place at the edge of the world, perched on a cliff over a hungry sea. It waits for the storms, and it waits for the lost and the broken. It offers them a cup of coffee, a moment of peace, and a choice. A choice between the long, hard road of life and the soft, green, final peace of the light. I think about that choice sometimes on long, lonely nights when the road seems endless, and I am terrified by how tempting it still is. My name is Ben. I'm a livestock hauler. It's a smelly, noisy, and thankless job, but it pays the bills. I transport cattle, hogs, and sheep from ranches and farms to slaughterhouses and processing plants. My roots crisscross the vast, empty spaces of the American West, taking me through landscapes that most people only see on postcards. I've seen every kind of wildlife you can imagine on these roads. Massive bull elk standing like statues in the dawn mist, herds of pronghorn antelope flowing like water across the plains, and mountain lions, their eyes glowing like embers in my headlights. I'm used to animals. I know their shapes, their movements, their behavior. I know what belongs in the wilderness, and I know what I saw one moonless night on a deserted stretch of highway in northern Idaho was not from this world. The road was a lonely one, a state highway that snaked through the dense, dark forests of the Panhandle National Forest. It's a place of deep woods, rugged mountains, and a silence that feels ancient and heavy. The locals call it the Black Woods. It's a place steeped in strange legends, stories passed down from the old logging camps and the native tribes that have lived there for centuries. They talk about disappearances, about hunters who walk into the woods and never walk out. They talk about a thing that lives in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest, a thing that hunts the roads at night. I always dismiss these as campfire stories, the kind of tales people tell to spook themselves in the dark. I was on a late-night run, hauling a load of hogs to a plant in Spokane. It was around 1 a.m., the road completely deserted. The forest pressed in on both sides, a solid wall of blackness, the massive pine and fir trees so dense they seemed to swallow the light from my headlights. The only sound was the rumble of my engine and the occasional nervous grunt from the hogs in the trailer behind me. That was the first sign. The hogs were agitated. Normally on a night run they'd be quiet, mostly sleeping. But tonight they were restless, shuffling and squealing, their fear a tangible, acrid smell that drifted into the cab. Animals have a sixth sense. They can feel a predator long before a human can. I thought it was a bear or maybe a wolf pack moving through the woods nearby. I slowed my speed, my eyes scanning the edges of the road. That's when I saw it. It was standing in the middle of the road, about 200 yards ahead, perfectly illuminated in the high beams of my truck. My first thought was that it was a moose, a big one. But as I got closer, that thought dissolved into a cold, creeping horror. It was not a moose. It was tall, impossibly tall, standing on two long, spindly legs that bent backwards like a bird's. It had to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall, its head nearly level with the top of my cab. Its body was gaunt, emaciated, covered in what looked like patchy, dark, matted fur, but its skin was a pale, sickly gray like a corpse. Its arms were long, far too long for its body, and they ended in hands with slender, elongated fingers that scraped the asphalt. But the head. Dear God, the head. It wasn't the head of any animal I had ever seen. It was long and narrow like a deer's skull, but there was no fur, no skin, just the pale white bone. And where the eyes should have been, there were only 2 large, dark, empty sockets. Yet I felt it watching me. I knew it could see me. From the tip of its elongated snout, a long, black, forked tongue like a snake's flickered out, tasting the air. It didn't move. It just stood there, a silent, skeletal, nightmarish statue in the middle of the road, its bone-white head cocked at an inquisitive angle. The hogs in my trailer were going insane now, squealing and slamming against the sides of the trailer in a frenzy of pure, primal terror. I was frozen. My mind, my logical diesel and steel trucker's mind, was refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. This thing was a biological impossibility. It was a collection of wrong parts, assembled by a mad god. It was a walking, breathing nightmare. The legends of the Black Woods flashed through my mind. The thing that hunts the roads. The stories said it was drawn to the sound of engines, to the movement of life in its silent, ancient domain. They said it was a spirit of hunger, a creature that existed before the trees, before the mountains. The creature took a step towards me. Its movement was jerky, unnatural, like a marionette with tangled strings. Its long, spindly legs moved with a horrifying, silent grace. The joints clicked, a dry, bony sound that was somehow audible over my rumbling engine. That sound broke my paralysis. I didn't think, I just reacted. I slammed my hand down on the air horn, unleashing a deafening, gut-shaking blast that echoed through the silent forest. I was hoping to scare it, to startle it into running back into the woods. It didn't flinch. It didn't even seem to notice the sound. It just stopped, tilted its skull-like head, and its forked tongue flickered out again, faster this time. It wasn't scared. It was curious. It was analyzing me. Then it did something that shattered the last remnants of my sanity. It opened its mouth. The long, bony snout split open along a seam I hadn't seen, revealing a maw filled not with teeth but with a swirling, chaotic mass of what looked like writhing black tendrils. And from that impossible mouth came a sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was a perfect mimicry of the sound my air horn had just made. A perfect, organic, fleshy imitation of a mechanical blast. It was mocking me. It was learning. I was done. I was not going to be a curiosity for this abomination. I stomped on the accelerator. My truck, a 40-ton beast of steel and power, roared forward. My intention was to run it down, to turn this nightmare into a smear on the asphalt. The creature watched me come. It didn't move. It just stood there, its empty sockets fixed on my approaching rig. At the very last second, just as I was about to hit it, it moved. It didn't run. It didn't jump. It unfolded. With a speed that defied physics, its long, spindly limbs stretched, elongated, becoming even longer, thinner. It was like watching a stop-motion animation of a spider unfolding its legs. It raised itself up, its body towering over my truck, its legs now like two massive skeletal stilts. My rig passed directly underneath it. For a split second, my entire world was the creature's pale, emaciated underbelly and its long, claw-like fingers scraping across the roof of my cab. The sound was like giant talons on a chalkboard. I cleared it. I was through. I didn't look back. I just drove, my foot welded to the floor, my eyes wide with a terror so absolute it had become a kind of crystalline clarity. I could hear the hogs in the trailer, their screams of terror, a soundtrack to my own. I drove for 50 miles without slowing down, without looking in my mirrors. I didn't want to know if it was following me. I just needed to get to the light. When I finally saw the distant glow of a 24-hour gas station, I almost wept with relief. I pulled in, my truck shaking, or maybe it was me. I stumbled out of the cab and was immediately hit by a smell that made me gag. A thick, musky carrion smell like a slaughterhouse left to rot in the sun. It was clinging to my truck. I did a walk around, my flashlight beam trembling. The roof of my cab was covered in long, deep gouges, the metal peeled back like a can. Whatever had scraped me had been incredibly strong, but that wasn't the worst of it. The trailer. The livestock trailer was an aluminum box with vents cut into the sides for air. Clinging to these vents on the outside were clumps of the same dark, matted fur I had seen on the creature. And smeared around the vents was a thick, black, tar-like substance that sizzled faintly, eating into the aluminum. With a sense of profound dread, I walked to the back of the trailer and unlatched the door. The hogs were silent now. A terrible, final silence. I swung the door open. The smell that hit me was a physical blow, a wall of death and decay. The trailer was empty. Not a single one of the 50 hogs I had been hauling was there. The trailer was clean, spotlessly clean. The floor, which should have been covered in hay and filth, was bare, wet, and scoured as if it had been washed with a powerful acid. The only thing left was the smell, and on the inside wall of the trailer, written in the same black corrosive substance, was a symbol, It wasn't a letter or a number. It was a complex geometric shape, like a stylized skeletal animal, a brand, a signature. I stood there in the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, and I understood. The creature hadn't been trying to attack me. It hadn't been interested in me at all. It was interested in my cargo. It had climbed onto my truck not to get to me, but to get to the trailer. It had somehow impossibly extracted 50 live hogs from a moving, sealed trailer, leaving no trace behind but a smell, a symbol, and a terrifying, clean emptiness. It hadn't been hunting me. It had been shopping. My truck had been its mobile pantry. I called my dispatcher. I told him I had been hijacked, that a gang had run me off the road and stolen my cargo. It was a flimsy story, but it was the only one I could tell. The company launched an investigation. They found the claw marks on my roof, which they attributed to impact with a low-hanging tree branch. They couldn't explain the clean trailer or the strange chemical burns on the aluminum. Eventually, they fired me for negligence and falsifying a report. I didn't care. I was just glad to be alive. I moved out of Idaho. I took a local driving job in a city, a place with no dark forest, no empty roads, but I did some research. I went to libraries, looked through old county records, and searched online forums dedicated to cryptozoology and local folklore. And I found him, my creature. It had many names. The local native tribes called it the hunger that walks. Old loggers' journals from the 19th century called it the grave digger deer. Modern accounts from the few hunters and truckers brave or foolish enough to talk called it the road rake. The stories were all different, but the descriptions were eerily the same. The impossible height, the backward bending legs, the bone-white skull for a head, the long claw-like fingers, and its behavior. It was always seen on deserted roads at night. It was always drawn to movement, to life. And it was always hungry. Some stories said it took livestock. Others said it took pets that had wandered too far from home. And the darkest stories, the ones whispered in hushed tones, said that it sometimes took people. Solitary drivers who broke down, hitchhikers, people who simply vanished from their cars on a lonely stretch of road. I believe that thing is a predator, but not a normal one. It's an apex predator of a different kind of ecosystem, an ecosystem of loneliness, of isolation, of the spaces in between. The deserted roads are its hunting grounds. And we, the truckers, the solitary travelers moving through its domain, we are just part of the food chain. We are the shepherds, unknowingly leading our flocks right into the monster's jaws. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been hauling livestock that night. If my trailer had been empty, would it have been interested in me? The thought keeps me awake at night. I am grateful for those 50 hogs. I believe they saved my life. They were the toll I paid to pass through the creature's territory. So if you're ever driving on a deserted road deep in the woods late at night and your animals get restless, listen to them. And if you see something standing in your headlights that doesn't belong, something tall and pale with a head made of bone, don't honk. Don't try to run it down. Just turn your truck around and drive away. Because you are in its territory, you are in its kitchen. And the only thing you can do is pray that you are not on the menu. Story 9. The Sleep Study. My name is Jacob. I'm a young guy, only been driving for about 3 years. Unlike the old-timers who have a lifetime of stories, I'm from the new generation. I rely on technology. My rig is a modern Freightliner Cascadia, loaded with more computers than the first Apollo mission. I use digital logbooks, advanced GPS with traffic prediction, and I'm always looking for new tech that can make the job easier, safer, and more profitable. That's what got me into trouble. My belief in technology and data in the clean, logical world of ones and zeros. I volunteered for a sleep study. It sounded simple, modern, and safe. It wasn't. It was an invitation for something ancient and terrible to find a new way into our world, not through a dark road, but through the back door of my own mind. The offer appeared on a digital load board, nestled between contracts for hauling produce and car parts. It was from a company called Somnus Neurologistics. They were looking for long-haul truckers to participate in a paid study on fatigue management. The premise was simple. They would equip your cab with a new, non-invasive brainwave monitoring device. You would wear a lightweight headset while you slept in your bunk, and the device would record your sleep patterns, REM cycles, deep sleep, everything. The goal, they said, was to develop an AI that could predict driver fatigue and suggest optimal rest times, making the road safer for everyone. The pay was fantastic, $2,000 a week on top of my regular hauling income just for wearing a headset while I slept. It sounded too good to be true, but the company seemed legitimate. They had a professional website, testimonials from other drivers, and the equipment they sent was top of the line, packaged like a new Apple product. The device was a sleek, minimalist headset that fit comfortably over my ears and rested against the back of my skull. It connected wirelessly to a small black box that I mounted on my dashboard. The box had a single small blue light that would pulse gently when it was recording. The instructions were clear. Wear the headset every time I slept, whether it was for a full 8-hour break or just a quick 30-minute nap. The data would be uploaded automatically via a cellular connection. For the first week, everything was normal. I did my usual runs hauling goods across the country. I barely noticed the headset. I slept as I always did, a deep, dreamless, exhausted sleep. The blue light on the box pulsed faithfully and the money appeared in my bank account exactly as promised. It was the easiest money I had ever made. The change began in the second week. I started having dreams. I'm not a big dreamer. Usually my sleep is just a black, empty void. But now my nights were filled with vivid, incredibly detailed dreams. And they were all the same. I was driving, but not on a normal highway. I was driving on a road made of pure, shimmering static like an old, untuned television screen. The sky above was a swirling vortex of black and gray clouds, and on either side of the road were tall, thin, featureless black monoliths like silent geometric trees. In the dream, I was always driving towards a single point of faint red light on the horizon. I never reached it. I would just drive and drive. The static road hissing beneath my tires, the black monoliths watching me pass. The dreams weren't scary, just strange, and I would wake up feeling incredibly refreshed, more rested than I had in years. I figured it was a side effect of the device, maybe some kind of neurostimulation to improve sleep quality. During the third week, the dreams began to change. The static road was the same. The monoliths were the same. But I was no longer alone. I would see other trucks on the road driving in the opposite direction. They were strange, old-fashioned rigs, ghost-like and translucent. As they passed, I could see the drivers. They were pale, gaunt figures, their eyes wide with a look of silent, screaming terror. They would look at me as they passed, their mouths open, but no sound would come out. They were trying to warn me about something. I started waking up from these dreams with my heart pounding, a cold sweat on my skin. The feeling of being rested was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing anxiety. I emailed my contact at Somnus Neurologistics, a researcher named Dr. Alistair Finch. I told him about the nightmares. His reply was swift and reassuring. "Dear Jacob," he wrote, "vivid dreaming is a known, though rare, side effect of the neural monitoring process. The headset can sometimes stimulate the brain's visual cortex. It is completely harmless. The data we are gathering is invaluable. Please continue with the study." I trusted him. He was the scientist. I was just the driver. I kept wearing the headset. The fourth week is when the true horror began. The dream changed, again. I was on the same static road, but I was no longer in my truck. I was standing on the side of the road and my truck was driving past me and I was in the driver's seat. I was watching myself drive by, my face calm, my eyes fixed on the red light on the horizon. But as the truck passed, the me in the driver's seat turned its head and looked directly at me. And it smiled. It was my face, but the smile was wrong. It was a cold, predatory, triumphant smile. It was the smile of a thief who had just stolen something precious. Then from the swirling black clouds above, something descended. It was a massive, shapeless black entity, a being made of pure shadow and chaotic, shifting geometry. It had no eyes, no mouth, but I could feel its ancient, malevolent intelligence. It was the source of the red light on the horizon. The light was its eye, and it was now focused on me, the version of me standing on the side of the road. The me in the truck drove on, disappearing towards the red light, leaving me behind. The massive shadow entity loomed over me, and I felt a psychic pressure, a voice that wasn't a voice, speaking directly into the core of my being. "The vessel is taken," it said. "The driver is no longer needed. You are the remainder, the echo. You will be unmade." I woke up screaming, a raw, guttural scream of pure terror. I tore the headset off my head and threw it against the wall of my cab, smashing it to pieces. I was drenched in sweat, my body trembling uncontrollably. It was just a dream, a terrible, vivid nightmare, but it felt so real. I sat there trying to calm my racing heart. I looked at the black box on my dashboard. The blue light was no longer pulsing. It was a solid, steady, angry red, the same red as the eye in my dream. I ripped the box from the dashboard, tearing the wires out. I threw it on the floor and stomped on it until it was a pile of shattered plastic and electronics. I tried to call Dr. Finch, but the number was disconnected. I looked up Somnus Neurologistics online. The website was gone. The company, the study, it had all vanished. It was as if it had never existed. I was terrified, but I told myself it was over. I had destroyed the device. I was free. I was wrong. That night, as I tried to sleep, I found I couldn't. The moment I closed my eyes, the image of the static road and the red eye would flash in my mind. But it wasn't a dream anymore. It was a memory. And I had a new, terrifying feeling, the feeling of being watched, even in the privacy of my own mind. The next day on the road, the real-world bleeding began. I would be driving fully awake, and for a split second the normal highway would flicker, replaced by the hissing static road from my dream. A normal highway sign would momentarily appear as one of the black, silent monoliths. I would see the ghost trucks in my rearview mirror, their terrified drivers mouthing silent warnings before vanishing. The dream was leaking into my reality. Or my reality was leaking into the dream. I was becoming unstuck from the world. I started to lose time. I would be driving and suddenly realize that an hour had passed that I couldn't account for. My logbook became a mess. I was missing delivery windows, showing up at destinations with no memory of the last 100 miles of the journey. And I was changing. I felt thinner, not physically but existentially. My emotions felt muted, distant. My memories of my own life, of my family, of my past began to feel like they had happened to someone else. I was becoming an echo, a remainder. The real me, the focused, driven version of me, was still driving that truck on the static road, heading towards the red light. And I was the part that had been left behind. I was fired from my job after I missed a critical delivery. I couldn't explain to my boss that I had lost 3 hours because the highway had turned into a hissing vortex of static. I lost my truck. I lost my career. I am writing this from a small, cheap motel room somewhere in Ohio. I haven't slept in 3 days. I'm afraid to close my eyes, because I know that the dream is waiting for me. The shadow entity, the thing that called itself the collector, is waiting. It unmade me, and now it wants to erase what's left. I did some digging. I'm not a detective, but I'm a desperate man. I found other truckers who had participated in the sleep study. Most of them were fine, but a few of them, their stories were like mine. They started having the dreams. They started losing time. Then, they started losing themselves. Their families reported them becoming distant, emotionless like strangers, and then one by one they vanished. Their trucks found abandoned at truck stops, their logs showing impossible journeys. I believe Somnus Neurologistics was a front, but not for a company or a government. It was a front for something else. Something that had existed for eons in a reality parallel to our own, a place of static and shadow. It was a predator. But it didn't hunt bodies, it hunted consciousness. It had learned to create a lure, a sleep study, using our own technology against us. The headset wasn't just a recording device, it was a bridge, a doorway. It opened a path for this entity to enter our minds while we slept, the most vulnerable state of human consciousness. And it performed a terrible psychic surgery. It would find the part of the driver's mind that was the perfect driver, the focused, tireless, goal-oriented part of the psyche that loved the road. It would separate that part, copy it, and pull it into its own reality, its static road. That driver would then pilot a phantom truck driving forever towards the red eye, generating some kind of psychic energy, some kind of fuel that the entity fed on, and the rest of us, the parts left behind, the doubt, the fear, the love for family, the desire to go home. We were the remainder, the useless data, the echo, left behind in the real world to slowly fade, to become untethered from reality until we simply ceased to be. The blue light on the box was the recording light. The red light meant the transfer was complete. The vessel had been taken. I can feel myself fading. My memories are like old photographs losing their color. The world outside my motel window seems thin, unreal, and the static road, it's getting easier to see even with my eyes open. The hissing is always there, just at the edge of my hearing. This is my last attempt to leave a warning. Do not trust the easy money. Do not trust the new technology that promises to make your life better. And above all, do not trust your dreams. Because there are things out there in the vast silent spaces between worlds that are hungry, and they have learned how to use our own minds as the bait for their traps. They are building a fleet of ghost drivers on a highway made of nightmares, and they are fueling it with the stolen souls of men like me. Outro: the road goes on forever. For the long-haul trucker, this is a fundamental truth. But the stories you have heard tonight suggest a more terrifying possibility. That some roads don't just go on forever. They lead to places that are not on any map. Places where the laws of our world no longer apply, and where the price of passage can be your memories, your sanity, or your very soul. The deserted roads of this country are not empty. They are haunted. Haunted by the echoes of tragedies, by ancient and hungry things, and by the terrifying creations of our own modern world. The drivers who travel these roads are the last line of defense, the solitary sentinels who face a darkness we can only dream of. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey with Mr. Chill Chapters. If these stories have you looking over your shoulder on your next late-night drive, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us to keep telling the tales that need to be told. Until next time, drive safe, trust your instincts, and if you see something on a lonely road that shouldn't be there, just keep driving and pray it doesn't follow you home.